Welcome everybody to our session today. We're going a little bit more philosophical or academic today. It's going to be Nicola and I talking about our understanding of behavioral design. We are very open to questions and discussions, so feel free to speak out. There is a bit of a presentation today, but we don't mind if you interrupt and let us know if you have something to say. I'm going to present my whole screen. Okay, cool. So our intention today with our discussion is to figure out how to understand design, behavioral design specifically for AI systems. We're going to be taking you through a couple of the ideas behind behavioral design. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the origins and the early use, so a little bit of the history, and giving you guys some examples of where you definitely know it exists in this world, particularly within digital spaces, but also within general human environments. And then we're going to walk through some of the frameworks and toolkits that can be used for it, some that I use a lot in my practice as well. And then we're going to be talking through some of the adoption challenges within business. And Nicola's going to give us a view of how AI can be used to bolster behavioral design, or at least implement behavioral design in such a way that doesn't necessarily require UX designers or behavioral designers to be in place. We're also going to be looking a little bit into the behavioral algorithms at quite a high level, and then dynamic experimentation and feedback loops, which is very important, and then closing up with understanding how all of this fits together in the automation of behavioral journeys. Behavioral design is a relatively young concept, particularly within the way that we use it at the moment. Within the 1980s is where you saw behavioral design, the formal practice, come together. And this is where we have the rise of behavioral economics. It was specifically around this idea of psychology and economy and how we can use psychology in order to craft environments that fit cultural nuances or practices, help humans collaboratively be better. I'll give you some examples of how that worked just now. But none of this, it was only really from about the 2000s onwards that we started to try to figure out how to use our understanding of psychology to change people's behavior, not just facilitate them within a space. And so from 2005, you had examples of academics like BJ Fogg, who worked for the Stanford Behavioral Design Lab. And I'll talk a little bit about Fogg and his theories soon. There'll definitely be a couple of examples that you guys absolutely do know about. It was the start of the space in which models began to be built around behavioral design. So from about 2007, 2010 onwards, there were these very specific siloed models created for industries. From about 2012, you could see a review of these ideas that we had before, which then exploded into a lot of different concepts and theories and ideas, but that needed unification. So we needed to understand that there was one set of terminology that related to a specific set of behavioral constraints, ideas, biases, approaches. And so we saw this sort of like common terminology begin to surface where more people could use it outside of the behavior design lab. So just to speak a little about this timeline, you can see that it was only from 2010 onwards that a lot of these theories and models started to be implemented. You have the Behavioral Insights team, also known as BIT. If you guys ever look it up, it's renowned, and they've got a lot of different concepts and frameworks. They were considered nudge units within governmental spaces. We also have things like ecosystem that existed or surfaced around 2019, where we pivoted to become this engine that ultimately delivers real-time recommendations using behavioral algorithms. So it was above and beyond what's sort of just being proposed from, a recommendation perspective. And then there was also this sort of like move towards bridging more of that gap between academia and sort of actual applications within spaces. The Decision Lab is more about ideas and functionalities, putting things into practice, and they work across different industries. For example, the Make It Toolkit came about in 2023. It was their version 1, and I'll talk through some of that now. This is probably a space in which everybody is the most interested. It was definitely a space in which I went, okay, cool. This is where we don't realize how much behavioral design is actually being used. So one of the great examples is the sweet aisle in our shops, which is very well poised. Usually moms with little kids who are bored because they've been shopping with their moms the whole day. They get to this massive tunnel where they need to wait in a queue, and they're surrounded by brightly colored promises of joy. And they hug their parents and they hug their parents and they hug their parents until they can finally get this little bit of something to kill the boredom and to be okay waiting in this queue. Now that's been scrutinized and called out quite a lot, and it has developed into something that is now more than just sweets within that space. Opportunities to lay out little tidbits that are want to haves rather than need to haves. But one of the examples that I really like to talk through, which comes from Europe, they decided to take a behavioral design approach to solving the problem of organ donation. Part of the process was to have a form in front of you. You fill out all of your details, and there's this checkbox at the end that says, tick this box if you would like to donate your organs when you die. I don't think that's something most people think about. So to make the effort at the end of this form, you just want to donate blood or something, or you want to just fill out this form because you want to get yourself checked out at the hospital. You don't really want to now have to think about, oh my gosh, what's going to happen to me after I die? How do I feel about donating my organs? Does it matter to me? Does it not matter to me? And so that box was usually left unticked. And there was something ridiculous, like a 15% organ donation rate. And so that's a very, very, very small amount of people that are like, yes, okay, cool. I know I want to donate my organs when I die. And so when the behavioral team came in and said, okay, cool, let's make one small tweak. We're not going to change the forms. We're not going to change the process. We're not going to change anything about what's sort of like structurally within this space. Let's experiment and test out making the wording of that checkbox, I do not want to donate my organs. And what you found was that the exact same thought process went through where people got to the end of this form, and the idea is that it is the right thing to do to donate your organs. It is the default thing to do to donate your organs. And so if you have a problem with it, check this box and then we won't donate your organs when you die. They saw a jump to 80% organ donations within a very short space of time just by having that in place. There are a number of different ways in which behavioral design is used to trigger action in us, to trigger some kind of emotive experience. Use Instagram quite a lot. Might have noticed this new trend towards closing down sales on the adverts. So it's, my family shop that's been making wooden rocking horses for the last 20 years is closing down, and we're sort of sad to see you go. Now that is a behavioral mechanism which incites FOMO in people, where they're worried about missing out on the final opportunity to gain something from this product or from this company. To give a little bit of context to that, models and frameworks and toolkits have increased in number over the years. I tried my hardest to collate as many of them as I could, and I decided I'm going to bring it down and I'm going to talk a little bit more about where the origins of these frameworks came from, or these models, an example of where we see it in place at the moment, and then also examples of excellent toolkits like ones that I use. The models that were generally built, at least in the earlier days, particularly from the 2010s and slightly before, were implemented quite strongly within governmental spaces. And things like Mindspace and East. So East is ultimately make it easy, make it accessible, make it social, and make it timely. And these were about how to create policy or write policies within governments that make it easier for people to follow and to act on, and also to make it easier for general law upholders to uphold the ideas of these concepts. One of the examples is this organ donation thing. The idea is that these models are used en masse to ultimately keep organization within cultural spaces. And then there were other models such as the FOG behavioral model, which looks at how to encourage action within spaces and within people. FOG's model is usually used hand in hand with gamification. One of the great examples of where we see this is in Duolingo. And Nicola and I were chatting yesterday about Duolingo. There are so many different behavioral mechanisms that Duolingo works. I mean, from the streets, which encourage competition and status, to the awards that you win along the way, which give you a sense of pride in every step that you take and want you to then ultimately go and take more steps towards this, all the way to having a very interactive emoji for the app itself, where the longer you leave it, the more and more downcast this poor little bird gets. It plays on your emotions, your stamina, your ability to withstand these triggers and behavioral tidbits. Another example of people that do gamification really well is companies like Discovery, where they have turned health and wellness, banking and insurance and investments into this game that you can play. Now, gamification has, I think, a lot of positive spins and some negative spins as well. I think the positive spins that come from an example like Discovery is in that it ultimately encourages good behavior within people, good behavior that prolongs life. It's good behavior that gets you to save more. It's good behavior that puts you in good stead, socially speaking, despite whatever methods it uses. But it also then encourages a sense of being able to play at this game of society, rather than just being told you have to do a certain thing to be a good citizen within our culture. This is saying we're not telling you to do anything, but we're showing you a way in which you can do these good things and enjoy the process at the same time. And then we have the toolkits. Now, there are a number of different toolkits, but I explicitly wanted to talk about the Make It toolkit because it is something that I've used a lot. While a lot of the frameworks and models that were created were very industry specific, something like the Make It toolkit have created this industry agnostic framework of ideas and concepts that you can pick and choose depending on your project. So they've brought it down to a minimal way of showing you that there are different ways that you can trigger action, create a sense of comfort within a space, create understandability in something not understood well at some points. For example, make it social to make people feel safe in their actions or the possible choice of brand that they're heading towards. Toolkits are great to be used in a number of different ways if you don't have a strict behavioral background. You can do anything from writing messages to planning prompts to organizing sales around product design, a number of different things that can be solved using toolkits.
Great. So I'm going to jump in here and talk a little bit about how businesses have been, well, not so much how they've been applying it, but why they aren't. Because what Jess has just laid out very explicitly is the value of behavioral design and all these resources that are out there to do it. So it begs the question, why aren't all businesses using behavioral design, especially in engagement practices that involve humans? If you think about behavioral design and what it takes to use behavioral design in automated systems, you need to think about three things. The reason why you want to automate behavioral design is because implementing behavioral design frameworks can be quite resource intensive, and you need people with the expertise to implement them. Behavioral design does also tend to throw all humans into one basket at times if it's not implemented in the right way, seeing all humans as having behavior, but not seeing that some individuals might behave differently from others. So the question is then, how do you use behavioral design, make it specific to individuals, of which there are millions within your business? The answer to that is to automate it. The only way you can do that is if you master these three components: evidence of behavior, effective experimentation methods, and a way to learn from that experimentation. So just starting with the first one, having evidence of behavior. When you have a machine learning model, you need some kind of input, and the input in this case would be behavior. Behavior doesn't exactly reveal itself in data as it is. Transactional data doesn't say much about it unless you have something that can pull the behavior out of it. A lot of companies have tried to subvert this by employing anthropologists. Interestingly, one of the businesses that employs the highest number of anthropologists is the tech giant Intel. Intel manufactures the highest number of microprocessors, or is one of the highest manufacturers of microprocessors. I'm not sure where it sits today, but they employ one of the highest numbers of anthropologists, which is interesting. You wouldn't think that of a tech company. The reason they do this is that anthropologists study how humans engage with and use technology across different cultures, because they want to understand how individuals are different and how they engage with it, and don't just want to assume that everybody engages with it the same way. And one of the lead anthropologists back in 2010, Genevieve Bell, went to Malaysia and came across this store while she was walking through the streets that kind of looked like a stationery shop. Her colleague said, just take a walk in, you'll see why you're actually wrong. It's not a stationery shop. The shop was filled with paper objects, paper bags, paper lipstick, paper cell phones, paper laptops. She asked the shopkeeper, what is this? The shopkeeper explained that there's a festival that happens once a year. It's a Chinese Malay tradition where they buy all these paper objects and burn them as offerings to the ancestors. They'll burn paper food so their ancestors have food in the afterworld, and they'll burn paper phones. And at the time, Nokia was the phone. Every year, you would find the latest upgrade of Nokia in the store so that their ancestors could have access to the upgraded version of Nokia. It sounds kind of laughable, but it does show that this technology, not only could people not live without it, but they couldn't be dead without it either. Intel was very effective and continues to be very effective in studying how different cultures engage with their technology. But most businesses don't really have those resources. They can't employ anthropologists who engage in this time-intensive field work. So you need a way to do this in an automated way. And you need a way to do this with the data that you already have access to. And businesses often have very sparse data about their customers. They have traces of them in digital platforms and in transactional data, but you need behavioral algorithms to extract other methods will be too costly. So that's the first challenge that businesses face. The second one is not having effective experimentation methods. This builds on the data problem because effective experimentation can help you build the data you have about an individual. If you can experiment and explore how they respond to different options, you can gain more knowledge about them. If experimentation isn't automated in and of itself, it can be very time intensive as well, because every time you want to change a tactic with a customer, it needs to go through several levels of authentication before it can be carried out. But if this is an automated process, you can deploy the new experimentation method in real time, or at least as you go. The third approach is continuous learning. So you need a way that you can learn from your experimentation methods. If you don't, you will just continue to go along the same track. Eric actually did a meetup a couple of weeks ago about feedback loops and several different feedback loops that models can use to improve their behavioral approaches. And this is very effective when deployed in real time, which a lot of businesses simply don't do, or they just have the wrong conception of what real time is. It's not seconds, or at least we don't see it as seconds, we don't see it as minutes, we see it as milliseconds, and behavior changes in milliseconds. So you need systems that can learn in alignment with behavioral change. The solution to all of these challenges is to combine your behavioral design with AI. Some businesses have been very successful with this, and I'm sure most of you are familiar with Spotify. If you think of the Discover Weekly playlist that they have that updates every week, you can see traces of behavioral design throughout because they use AI to observe your listening habits. So you've got your evidence of behavior component where they pick up on relevant data. Then they give you a playlist and learn from whether you add songs from that playlist to your liked songs and continuously update their beliefs and throw new songs at you each week. So they're continuously experimenting and learning from it. They kind of have all three pillars down, which makes it so effective. Just to give you a view of what that looks like in ecosystem, kind of the products that we've put out when we combine AI with behavioral design includes this kind of hyper-personalization at scale capability that we have. There's a whole bunch of them. I'm not going to go through all of them because Jess is also going to talk about it, but it can come in many different forms. And it all depends on what your specific business needs and what the use case that you have needs. Jess, I think if you can talk about what forms the foundation of all of these approaches, which is our behavioral algorithms.
Yeah, absolutely. So I just wanted to use the examples that Nicola's brought to light and understanding, where behavioral design fits within companies that have successfully used different AI approaches in order to get not just interactions from customers or engagements from customers, but also to make a much better product. So, Nicola's just taken us now through the Spotify example. If we look at Spotify from a behavioral algorithms perspective, they would be using something called collaborative filtering with content-based filtering and audio analysis. Now, audio analysis is ultimately trying to understand the beats or the rhythms of certain songs and how those songs can be grouped into much more accurate understandings than what genre would normally give you. Content-based filtering would then be whatever information the artist presents on their page. So genre would be a factor. If you're going to list yourself as metal, but you're not going to necessarily be paired anywhere near pop, even if the audio analysis is somewhat similar. Some of the other popular ones are like Pinterest as well, that uses collaborative filtering along with computer vision, and a bunch of others. They've also got something they call Explore Exploit. Netflix is the example that I wanted to explore in more detail, because they were one of the first to get it right in a lot of different ways. And the list of behavioral approaches that they use are very long. So while they don't necessarily use what I was talking about earlier in terms of just like models or frameworks or some of the behavioral toolkits, they took an understanding of all of this and an understanding of the technology that can ultimately deliver it and automate this, mushed it together and set it free. So what you often find within these spaces is that the creators of these technologies and the users of them don't always understand exactly how it works. Just like in psychology, we don't necessarily understand exactly how humans process certain emotions and feelings, and not always understanding exactly why we behave in the way that we do, only that the behavior is something that it needs to be in order to make this a successful space. You know, if we look at Netflix, we could look at things like content-based filtering and matrix factorization, which is something we at Ecosystem talk quite a lot about, using matrices of offers or messages, products or deals or sale items, which you feed in its entirety into a text space or into the engagement space, and you see something come from that. I'll talk a little bit through that just now. They've also got deep learning neural networks, things like that. And something important, which is this idea of using contextual bandits. So I've just written the contextual bandits framework as an overarch for Netflix, because this calls into light something that we at Ecosystem have quite a lot of. As Nicola mentioned, Eric did a talk about it quite recently, where he spoke through our use of epsilon greedy or ecosystem rewards or something like Bayesian regression. Algorithms that understand human interactions and automate reactions based on those interactions and the offers thereof. Nicola will put the link to the video in the chat if you guys are interested in watching that. Nicola's also got a link to a blog that was written on exactly this, on all of these behavioral algorithms, because there's so much that goes into it. You know, if we think about one of the examples that is sometimes both really useful and also sometimes not, I've got this example here with the Amazon purchasing platform, where if you add a cell phone to your cart, it brings up these two panels underneath it, which is something we're all very familiar with, but took a long time to actually implement and put in space. So the first one is, you know, items that bought this thing also bought these things. Now, interestingly, this is collaborative filtering. It's going that there are certain genres of product that can be paired together, and certain genres of products that are ultimately paired as add-ons. I remember being quite aware of the fact that a lot of times that this is used, this behavioral technique of, okay, cool, so you've bought this thing, but wait, there's more, where you purchase a kettle and you put that into your cart, and the banner that it brings up at the bottom with the phrase of customers also bought these, and there's like 5 different other kettles. So it's very unlikely that that's going to happen at all. A space in which, or an example in which this works quite well, is if you've got books. So you'll have somebody that will buy a book of a particular type, and then it'll be like at the bottom, customers also bought these. So this is where collaborative filtering works very well on its own. Where it doesn't work is in the example of the kettle. So a way that it is working very well at the moment is where somebody buys a cell phone, and it automatically brings up this banner at the bottom where it's like, okay, cool, now that you've bought this phone, you want to keep it safe. You need a tempered glass screen, a plastic cover, AirPods, a case, or one of those little rings on the back. You basically need a series of things to protect this purchase. And it works very well for both customers and brands. So the brands get an opportunity to sell a lot more, and the customers also then have this space in which that effort of now having to go back into the search and search for the cover, and then go back into the search and search for the tempered glass screen, that's all completely removed. And it makes it a lot easier to just purchase things. And in a space where it's like, I'm going to spend a bunch of money, I might as well spend a little bit extra on things that's going to protect this purchase. And so something that these companies do very well, something that Netflix and Spotify and Pinterest in particular do very well with regards to how they use their behavioral algorithms, is within experimentation. Now, dynamic experimentation in a lot of ways is fundamental to using behavioral design within digital spaces, because it takes you beyond this space in which you are just laying down a set of hypotheses and ideas in a boardroom, pushing them out there and expecting that they're going to work. Once upon a time, you had a product and you had a series of heads of that product. They would decide what the brand is, what the narrative is, what the message is that goes out, what the color of the branding is, or the product itself, and they would push that to customers and say, this is what you get, take it or leave it. Now, we know that this doesn't necessarily work. In some ways it does, where you go, okay, cool, this is what I've made and you will like it. But in a lot of ways it doesn't, especially when you've got environments in which competitions arise and you want to retain somewhat of a monopoly within a space. And so what that did was gave rise to an environment in which there was subtle testing. Now, A/B testing is something, like Nicola mentioned already, that is used very often, but it is also something that I think a lot of people are very aware of. Not necessarily when it's being tested on themselves within a digital space, but how the concept works. But just to give a high-level view, it's two options instead of just one. You let it go off on its showdown in the field, and whichever one comes out on top is the one that gets applied across the board. This was a very effective step away from just, okay, cool, I'm going to push this thing out and hope it works. But it's now very outdated, right? And we should so absolutely be beyond that, because we need to understand more than just, you've got two options, choose one, whichever one is the most popular, everybody else has to then have that one thing. So what we often suggest is this space of dynamic experimentation in which you're not testing which is the most popular. You're testing which options are going to be the most effective in as many different pockets or niches as it possibly can. And what this does is that it ultimately accounts for behavior changes over time, in that it can start to present offers. If you have 5 different colors that you're putting out there, and you know that group A seems to be very fond of the color red, you will start to see that group A will turn into group B, that is the color green. Behavior changes over time depending on what context they're in that particular space. And so what you do by having a dynamic experimentation framework is that you are appealing to every individual in every stage of their life, but you're also appealing to as many different groups of people as you possibly can. So
yeah, I think it's really, I've been doing some reading on this today because Ramsey did a whole drawing for me in Paint software yesterday trying to explain multi-unbalance. But I think, like you said, like dynamic experimentation it's about getting closer and closer to what an individual prefers, whereas A/B testing stays at a certain level. And I think that gives dynamic experimentation kind of the quality of building a relationship, because you get closer and closer, you're getting to know this customer, and they are becoming increasingly more satisfied with the engagement that you have with them. Yeah.
Yes, it's also important to call back to what you said earlier with regards to the automation. And this is where the feedback loops come in. So, it's having this space in which you're speaking to everybody, but that the system ultimately learns from and presents from as well. And so you have this closed loop in which it's not about you then needing to go back to the drawing board and reassess and then go back to the drawing board after iterations. And this helps us get to a point where we can begin to craft things like agentic journeys, right? So we can have our AI agents that have this dynamic experimentation backing. They've got this environment in which feedback loops are extremely prominent, but then they've also got pivotal points within journeys that call to certain behavioral techniques, tactics, or triggers that can happen at particular points. So you can have a recommendation that comes up at a certain point when somebody asks about something that provides them with a product, and a trigger that encourages them to act on that series of recommendations, behaviorally designed and put into that space. And what you can have in light of this whole experimentation style is that you can have different behavioral approaches that will be tested at certain points in the journey.
Yeah, great. I think that really wraps it up nicely. I'm not sure if anybody from the audience has any comments about anything we've touched on, from behavioral tactics that you see in the everyday world, things that you see in your business, any hesitance that you see in implementing these things. Like when people think behavioral design, maybe the thought comes to mind that there are some slightly unethical practices. And I know Jess and I were talking about one specific approach that has been coming under fire recently, the fear, uncertainty, doubt approach. I don't know, Jess, if you want to touch on that a bit.
Yeah, it's quite interesting because fear, uncertainty, doubt has been used for a very long time and is ultimately very effective. Everybody is guaranteed had some kind of experience with. So something like the scarcity principle, which acts on somebody's fear of missing out of this thing, or a certain exclusivity of a thing. So you are being given an offer and there are only 100 of this offer. If you don't act now, you will not ever get access to this thing again. While everybody else is going to have a great time, you're going to miss out on it. The reason why it's come under fire for the supposed unethical implications is because it's ultimately manipulative, and that it plays on negative emotions rather than positive emotions. A lot of the recommendations within the behavioral world is to swap out those negative connotations with positive ones. An example in the gambling space, and now off the top of my head, I can't remember where exactly it was, but they have, it's somewhere in Norway, somewhere up there, that they have swapped out all of the lights, bells, and jingles, and all of the pleasing elements of slot machines in favor of a screen that you press a button, it does the rolling thing, and you either win or you don't win. And it's up to you to decide whether to proceed or not. And that's taking all of this sort of behavioral triggers, manipulative elements out of the equation and testing how effective those approaches are as well.
I think businesses need to be aware of the fact that their customers aren't stupid. People are becoming more aware, especially in the digital space. They can recognize when a behavioral tactic is being used and when it's misplaced. something I found interesting because I'm trialing Vitality, like Discovery's Vitality, and I've opened a Discovery Bank account. When you have Vitality, it includes a game board feature in your bank app, which at first I was like, this is a bit strange, but because I know Discovery has this reward system that I know a lot of people who use it, and it's trusted and it's respected, it seems okay that it's kind of in the banking app. But if you don't place it in the right place, in the right context, if it's too overt, people will pick up on it and it loses effectiveness. Most behavioral tactics are most effective when people are unaware.
Yeah, definitely. And also where it is, I guess, it's where it is well placed. I mean, it is something that does need to be thought through. And I think something about the relationship between behavioral design and AI is that ultimately, the AI figures out where it should be placed in a way that's subtle enough for it to not be this jarring experience. And so you end up having a far more robust system in which customers are happier, businesses are happier, and the system is just doing what it needs to do without exclusion and also without any manipulative elements.
Great. I think behavioral design in an AI space is working not with assumption, but with evidence. I see data as fuel, and for an AI strategy to continue, it needs more fuel. And if the fuel isn't there, it's just going to die out. So whatever experimentation track you're on is immediately going to die out if you're not gaining enough success from it. If there's too much failure, it automatically puts an end to things that don't work and switches to something that does.
Tristan, I think all forms of marketing are, in a way, manipulation. Subtlety is so much better because too much feels like a used car salesman or a scammer. You need to figure out at what point to say what and in what way. Marketing can be considered manipulation, but it's also about getting the word out. Think about it more from the perspective of how do I share the thing that I have that I'm proud of and that I know is going to make a change. I was actually quite struck by how often brands will use this thing will change your life or to make the world a better place. And I wonder whether some of them use it ironically, right? Because it's like so many people are going, okay, cool, this thing is going to make the world a better place. Not everything is going to make the world a better place, but in some ways it can make your life easier or better. I think that every product out there does ultimately have a place, at least most. And it is about then finding ways in which you can convey this concept in the best possible ways. Behavioral design has a place and it's being used in governments for a very, very long time in order to create well-organized systems that make the world a better place. We need to start utilizing that same idea within businesses in order to know, as Margot says, when to back off and when to approach, when to be subtle, when to be excited, when to be bright and flashy and powerful, and also when to be more muted and create a sense of safety.
You just triggered me a bit because of that Norway thing, but I've been thinking about it. If you look at Apple's marketing, it's probably the most subtle marketing in the world. They're one of the most successful brands. There's nothing flashy about them. Simplicity is the marketing.
Yeah, and definitely ones that have used, I think, behavioral tactics in the best possible way. I mean, they've got that sense of exclusivity down. The entire brand is based off of it. So yeah, absolutely. I don't know if anybody's got any other questions. I can see we're coming up to the end. And I just wanted to say thank you all so much for being here. I really appreciate it. I hope you learned something from today.